My name is Matt, and I am 54 years old. I have spent 30 years hiding something from the person I love most in this world. My daughter Harper never knew about the warehouse on the edge of town. She never knew what I built inside those walls with my own two hands. And for 28 years, I thought I was protecting her. But standing here tonight, hearing footsteps inside my secret place, I realize some secrets have a way of finding the light. Let me tell you what happened. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I always love knowing who is listening to these old stories of mine. And if you have not already, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. What you are about to hear changed my life forever, and I believe it might just change yours too. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a small industrial town in Ohio, the kind of place where smokestacks painted the sky gray and working men came home with calloused hands and tired eyes. My father worked at the steel mill for 37 years. Every morning he left before sunrise, and every evening he returned smelling of iron and sweat. My mother worked at the laundry service downtown, pressing shirts and folding sheets for families who had more than we ever did. We lived in a 2-bedroom house with peeling paint and a front porch that creaked under every footstep. Money was tight. Dinner was often beans and cornbread, and Christmas gifts were usually practical things like socks or secondhand books. But my father had a way of making even the hardest days feel meaningful. One Saturday morning when I was 8 years old, he woke me up before dawn and told me to get dressed. We drove 2 hours to a car show in Columbus. I had never seen anything like it. Rows and rows of gleaming automobiles from another era. Chrome bumpers reflecting the morning sun. Leather interiors that smelled like history itself. I stood frozen in front of a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, my mouth hanging open like I had just witnessed something holy. My father put his hand on my shoulder and said something I have never forgotten. He said, "Son, a man builds something with his own hands, and that thing carries his soul. It does not matter if the world ever sees it. What matters is that you know it is yours." From that day forward, I was obsessed. I collected magazine clippings of classic cars. I drew pictures of Mustangs and Corvettes in my school notebooks. I knew I would never afford one, but that did not stop me from dreaming. When I was 24, I met Sandra at a summer concert in the park. She had brown hair that caught the evening light and a laugh that made everything else disappear. We dated for 2 years and married on a spring afternoon with wildflowers in her hair and hope in our hearts. When Harper was born 2 years later, I thought my life was complete. I held that tiny girl in my arms and made a silent promise to give her everything I never had. But Sandra changed after Harper arrived. The small-town life that once felt charming now felt suffocating to her. She talked about wanting more, about cities with tall buildings and restaurants that required reservations. I worked longer hours trying to make her happy, but nothing was ever enough. When Harper was 3 years old, I came home to an empty closet and a note on the kitchen table. Sandra had left with a man she met at her sister's wedding. The note said she was sorry, but she needed to find herself. I read that note 17 times before I could breathe again, but I did not have time to fall apart. Harper was waiting for me to pick her up from daycare, so I wiped my eyes, steadied my hands, and became both mother and father to my little girl. After Sandra left, I worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. During the day, I worked at an auto repair shop downtown. At night, I drove a taxi through the quiet streets of our town, listening to late-night radio and thinking about the future. Harper stayed with my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, while I worked, and I paid her with homemade dinners and yard work on weekends. One afternoon, about a year after the divorce, I was driving past an old salvage yard on the outskirts of town when something caught my eye. Sitting behind a chain-link fence covered in rust and forgotten by the world was a 1967 Ford Mustang. My heart stopped. I pulled over and walked to the fence like a man approaching a ghost. The owner of the salvage yard was a grizzled old man named Earl who had no idea what he had. He said the car had been sitting there for 8 years and nobody wanted it. Too much work, he said. Too far gone. I offered him $600, every penny I had saved for emergencies. He laughed and shook my hand. It took me 2 years to restore that Mustang. I worked on it after Harper went to sleep in a tiny garage behind our rented house. I learned everything from library books and trial and error. When I finally turned the key and heard that engine roar to life, I sat in the driver's seat and cried. Not because of the car, but because of what it represented. I had built something with my own hands, something that carried my soul. A few months later, a man in a suit knocked on my door. He said he was a collector, and he had heard about my Mustang from someone at the auto shop. He offered me $12,000 on the spot. I almost fell over. That was more money than I made in a year. I thanked him politely and told him the car was not for sale. That night, lying in bed, I realized something important. There was a world of forgotten cars out there, abandoned machines that people thought were worthless. But I knew their value. I knew what they could become with patience and care. And I realized that building a collection like this could be my way of creating something lasting, something to leave behind for Harper when I was gone. But I also knew I needed to keep it secret. Sandra was still out there somewhere, and Ohio law meant she could come back and claim half of everything I owned. More importantly, I wanted Harper to grow up understanding the value of hard work, not the comfort of hidden wealth. I did not want her to become someone who expected things to be handed to her. So I made a decision. I found a cheap piece of land about 15 miles outside of town, an old farm property with a rundown barn. I bought it for almost nothing and spent 6 months converting that barn into a proper storage facility. I installed climate control security cameras and reinforced doors. From the outside, it looked like any other abandoned structure. But inside it became my sanctuary. The only person I told was Lou. We had been friends since high school, and after Sandra left, he was the one who helped me put the pieces back together. Lou had spent 25 years as a police officer before retiring early due to a knee injury. He understood secrets. He understood loyalty. And he understood why I needed to keep this part of my life separate. For the next 3 decades, I lived 2 lives. By day, I was Matt the mechanic, a simple man in work boots and grease-stained shirts. By night, by weekend, whenever I could steal a few hours, I was a restorer of forgotten beauty. I found cars in the strangest places. I discovered a 1963 Chevrolet Corvette in red behind an abandoned farmhouse. The widow who owned the property did not know it was valuable. She sold it to me for $900 because she just wanted it gone. I pulled a 1973 Porsche 911 from a foreclosure auction for less than $3,000. A 1968 Shelby GT 500 came from a storage unit sale in Cleveland. Each car had a story. Each restoration took months, sometimes years. I did most of the work myself, but for the truly technical jobs, I partnered with a man named Jimmy Tran. Jimmy ran a small restoration shop 2 towns over, and he was the best mechanic I had ever met. He had come to America from Vietnam as a young man and built his business from nothing. Jimmy understood me. He never asked questions about why I kept everything so quiet. He just helped me bring these machines back to life. By the time Harper turned 20, I had 12 cars in that warehouse. 12 pieces of American automotive history, polished and preserved, and worth more than $4 million combined. And not a single soul knew except Lou and Jimmy. Harper grew up believing her father was a modest mechanic who lived paycheck to paycheck. She never wanted for anything important, but she also never had luxury. I drove an old pickup truck. I wore clothes from thrift stores. I fixed things instead of replacing them. And I thought I was teaching her character. What I did not realize was that I was also building a wall between us. Raising Harper alone was the hardest and most rewarding thing I ever did. When she was small, we had our routines. Every morning I made her breakfast, usually scrambled eggs and toast cut into triangles, because she said triangles tasted better. I learned to braid her hair by watching videos at the library practicing on pieces of rope until I got it right. At night, I read to her from a worn copy of Charlotte's Web until she could recite whole passages from memory. I worked 14-hour days, but I never missed a school play or a soccer game. I sat in tiny chairs at parent-teacher conferences. I chaperoned field trips to the fire station and the pumpkin farm. When Harper was 9, she made me a drawing in art class. It showed a man standing next to a car with tools in his hands. At the top, in purple crayon, she wrote, "My hero." I kept that drawing in a frame next to my bed, and it is still there today. Harper was everything I had hoped she would be. She was smart and curious and kind. She asked questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? How do engines work? What makes thunder? I answered as best I could, and when I did not know, we looked it up together in encyclopedias at the library. Through all those years, the warehouse remained my secret. Every few weeks, I would tell Harper I was going to visit a friend or run an errand out of town. She never questioned it. I would drive to the warehouse, spend a few hours with my cars, and return feeling renewed. It was my meditation, my therapy, my connection to my father and to the dreams of my youth. Jimmy and I finished restorations slowly but steadily. The Corvette took 3 years. The Porsche took 4. Each completed project felt like a small miracle. Jimmy would come over with his tools and his quiet focus, and we would work side by side without needing many words. His wife made us lunches that we ate sitting on overturned buckets. When we finished a car, we would take it for one drive around the back roads, just to hear the engine sing, and then we would park it in its place among the others. By the time Harper reached high school, she had become fiercely independent. She excelled in her classes and joined the debate team. She had friends who came from families with more money than ours, and I noticed small changes in her. She started caring more about brand names. She asked why we could not go on vacations like her friends did. I told her we had everything we needed, and for a while she seemed to accept that. Then came college. Harper got accepted to a university 3 hours away, and I was proud enough to burst. I drove her to campus that first day, helped her carry boxes up to her dorm room, and tried not to cry in front of her roommates. On the drive home, the silence in my truck was so heavy I could barely breathe. She called every Sunday that first year. We would talk for an hour about her classes, her professors, the dining hall food. But by sophomore year, the calls became shorter. By junior year, they moved to every other week. She was busy, she said. Studying, working part-time, making friends. I understood. I remembered what it was like to be young and hungry for the world. But something else was changing too. When Harper did call, she talked about her friends' apartments in nice neighborhoods, their parents' beach houses, their summer trips to Europe. There was a tone in her voice I had never heard before. Not quite embarrassment, but something close to it. When she came home for Christmas, her senior year, she brought a friend named Madison, who looked around our modest house with barely hidden pity. Harper did not defend our home. She did not tell Madison about the memories in these walls. She just changed the subject. After graduation, Harper took a job at a marketing firm in the city. She called less and less. When I asked her to come home for Thanksgiving, she said she had to work. When I offered to drive up and visit her, she said her apartment was too small and maybe next month. Next month never came. On my 50th birthday, I waited by the phone all day. At 11:45 at night, I received a text message. It said, "Happy birthday. Dad, sorry, I could not call, super busy with work." No phone call, no visit. Just 12 words on a screen. I drove to the warehouse that night and sat in the darkness among my cars. I thought about everything I had built, 12 automobiles worth millions of dollars, and not a single person to share them with. I had planned to leave everything to Harper when I died. I had imagined the look on her face when she discovered what her father had secretly created. But sitting there alone on my 50th birthday, I wondered if she would even care. I remember the exact moment I met Derek. It was a Sunday in March, and Harper had called the day before to say she was bringing someone special home. Those two words, someone special, made my heart lift in a way it had not in years. Maybe this was a turning point. Maybe she was coming back to me. They arrived just before noon. Harper looked different. Her hair was styled in a way I had never seen. Her clothes were expensive, the kind with subtle logos that only mattered to people who cared about such things. And beside her stood Derek. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of smile that showed too many teeth. He wore a watch that cost more than my truck and shoes that had never seen a day of real work. His handshake was firm but performative, like he had practiced it in a mirror. His first words to me were, "Matt, great to finally meet the man who raised such an incredible woman." Nobody called me Matt, except people who did not know me. My friends called me by my last name or nothing at all. But I smiled and welcomed them inside. Over lunch, Derek dominated the conversation. He talked about his real estate development company, his recent deals, his connections with important people. He dropped names like he was scattering seeds, expecting admiration to bloom wherever they landed. Harper watched him with stars in her eyes, laughing at jokes that were not funny, and touching his arm like he might disappear if she let go. I listened and nodded and asked polite questions, but something felt wrong. It was the way his eyes moved around my house, cataloging every detail. It was the questions he asked me, each one circling closer to money. "So Matt, you have worked at that shop for a long time. Must have some savings by now, right? A man who works hard his whole life, he must have something to show for it." I gave vague answers. I talked about living simply, about being content with what I had. Derek's smile never wavered, but I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or recalculation. After they left, I called Lou. I told him about Derek, about the questions, about the feeling in my gut. Lou listened without interrupting, then asked if I wanted him to look into the guy. Part of me said yes, but another part, the part that did not want to lose Harper completely, said no. What if I was wrong? What if this was just my protective instincts going too far? What if I pushed Harper away for good? So I did nothing. 6 weeks later, Harper called to tell me she was engaged. The wedding would be in 4 months. She wanted a small ceremony, nothing fancy. Derek had already handled most of the planning. I asked if I could help pay for anything. Derek got on the phone and said, "We appreciate that, Matt, but we have got this covered. Do not worry about a thing, old man, old man." The words landed like a slap. The wedding was held at a country club 2 hours from my home. When I arrived, I discovered I had been seated at a table near the back, far from the family section. The other guests at my table were Derek's co-workers who spent the evening talking about market trends and investment portfolios. I sat in my one good suit eating chicken I could not taste, watching my daughter dance with a man I did not trust. Derek's family was notably absent. When I asked Harper about it, she said his parents had passed away years ago, and he was estranged from his siblings. No aunts, no uncles, no cousins. No one who had known Derek before he became Derek. Grandma Ruth flew in from Texas for the ceremony. She was 80 years old and sharp as a tack. Afterwards, she pulled me aside and said, "Matthew, that boy has hungry eyes. I have seen men like him before. They take everything and leave nothing behind." I wanted to believe she was wrong. I wanted to believe my daughter had found happiness. So I smiled and hugged her and told her everything would be fine. After the honeymoon, Harper and Derek moved into an apartment in the city. The phone calls, already rare, became almost non-existent. When I did reach Harper, Derek always seemed to be nearby listening. She spoke in shorter sentences. She laughed less. She sounded tired. I called one Sunday in November, hoping to finalize plans for Thanksgiving. Harper answered, and before I could finish my sentence, she said, "Dad, I am so sorry, but we cannot make it this year. Derek has a business trip, and I am going with him." It was the first Thanksgiving in 28 years that I spent alone. I cooked a small turkey anyway, out of habit. I set the table for two, then sat there staring at the empty chair where my daughter should have been. That night, I took out the drawing she made when she was 9. My hero. The purple crayon had faded over the years. The paper was soft and worn from how many times I had held it. I wondered if I was still her hero. I wondered if I had ever been. 3 months after that lonely Thanksgiving, Lou showed up at my door unannounced. His face was grim, the way it used to look when he had to deliver bad news during his years on the force. He sat at my kitchen table and placed a folder in front of me. I asked him what it was. He said he could not stand by anymore. He said he had done some digging, called in some favors from old colleagues in other states. What he found made his stomach turn. The man my daughter married was not Derek Morrison. His real name was Daniel Kessler. He had been born in Nevada and spent his 20s drifting from state to state, leaving wreckage wherever he went. There were 2 previous marriages. The first was to a woman in Arizona whose father owned a chain of dry cleaning stores. Daniel married her, gained access to her family's finances, and disappeared 18 months later with over $200,000. The second marriage was in Florida, to a woman whose mother had just inherited a house. Daniel convinced his wife to take out a second mortgage on the property. When the money ran out, so did he. Both women filed police reports. Neither resulted in charges because Daniel always stayed just inside the boundaries of the law. Lou showed me photographs, court documents, police reports. The pattern was unmistakable. Daniel Kessler, now calling himself Derek Morrison, was a professional predator. He targeted women from families who appeared modest but had hidden assets. He was patient. He was charming. And he was very, very good at what he did. I asked Lou how Derek found me. Lou shook his head and said he did not know. Maybe it was through Harper's friends. Maybe Derek had ways of investigating potential marks. What mattered now was what I planned to do about it. I drove to the city the next day. 4 hours of highway, 4 hours of rehearsing what I would say. When I arrived at their apartment building, Derek met me at the door. His smile was exactly the same as the first time we met, all teeth and no warmth. He told me Harper was sleeping and maybe I should come back another time. I said I would wait. For 5 hours, I sat in a coffee shop across the street watching the entrance. Finally, around 6 in the evening, Harper emerged alone. I crossed the street and called her name. She looked thinner than I remembered. There were shadows under her eyes that makeup could not hide. When she saw me, her first expression was not joy. It was panic. We sat on a bench in a small park nearby. I told her everything. I showed her the documents Lou had gathered. I pointed to the photographs of Daniel Kessler, the man she knew as Derek. I begged her to listen, to look at the evidence, to trust me the way she had when she was small. Harper's face cycled through emotions: confusion, disbelief, and then something I had not expected: anger. She said, "Derek warned me you would do this. He said you would try to destroy our marriage because you cannot stand to see me happy. He said you never got over Mom leaving and you want me to be as miserable as you." I felt the words like physical blows. I tried to respond, but she was not finished. She stood up, her hands shaking. She said, "You know what I think? I think you are jealous. I finally have a real life, a successful husband, a future. And you want to take it away because all you have is that sad little house and your dead-end job." She took the documents from my hands and tore them in half. Then she walked away without looking back. I sat on that bench until the sun went down, the torn papers scattered around my feet like fallen leaves. Everything I had tried to do, everything I had sacrificed, all of it amounted to nothing. My daughter had chosen a con man over her own father. The drive home was a blur. At some point, I pulled over to the side of the road because I could not see through my tears. I sat there for hours, remembering. The tiny hand that used to grip my finger. The voice that called out for Daddy when she had nightmares. The girl who drew pictures of me as her hero. Where had she gone? When had I lost her? And was there any way to get her back? In the weeks after Harper cut me off, I went through the motions of living without really being alive. I woke up, went to work, came home, ate dinner alone, and stared at the television without seeing it. Lou checked on me every few days, but I had nothing new to say. Jimmy invited me to the warehouse to work on a new project, but I could not summon the energy. The warehouse itself felt different now. All those years I had built the collection as a legacy for Harper. Every restored engine, every polished chrome detail, every perfectly matched paint job was done with her in mind. But now the cars just sat there, beautiful and purposeless. What I did not know was that Derek had become obsessed with discovering what I was hiding. After our confrontation, he must have sensed that my reaction was too strong for a simple mechanic with nothing to lose. He began digging. Derek accessed property records through a contact who worked at the county assessor's office. He discovered that I owned land outside of town, a parcel with a structure listed as an agricultural building. He drove out there one evening, parking his car a quarter-mile away and approaching on foot. From a distance, the warehouse looked like nothing special. Weathered boards, a rusted roof, overgrown weeds. But Derek noticed details that others would miss: the fresh tire tracks leading to the bay door, the subtle gleam of a security camera beneath the eaves, the lock on the main entrance that was far more sophisticated than anything a simple barn would require. He knew there was something inside. He just did not know what. Over the following month, Derek manipulated Harper into sharing more information about my past. He asked casual questions about my hobbies, my habits, where I spent my weekends. Harper, still angry with me and eager to prove her loyalty to her husband, answered without suspicion. She mentioned that I sometimes disappeared for hours, saying I was visiting a friend or running errands. She remembered a time when she was young and found a car magazine hidden under my mattress, filled with pictures of classic automobiles circled in red pen. Derek pieced together the puzzle. A mechanic with a secret passion for classic cars. A hidden property with unusual security. A man who lived far below his apparent means. He became certain that the warehouse contained something valuable, possibly a single rare car, possibly a small collection. Either way, it was money he felt entitled to claim. He began forming a plan. He would need someone to assist with the physical work of accessing the property and removing whatever was inside. He reached out to an old associate named Victor, a man he had worked with on a previous scheme in Florida. Victor agreed to come up for a cut of the profits. Derek chose a night in November, a date when the weather forecast predicted heavy rain. The rain would provide cover-masking noise and discouraging anyone from being out on the roads. He told Harper he had a business dinner and would be home late. She did not question it. She never questioned anything anymore. Meanwhile, I had finally started to emerge from my depression. Lou convinced me to come to his house for dinner one night, and his wife made a pot roast that reminded me of my mother's cooking. We talked about nothing important, but by the end of the evening, I felt something loosen in my chest. The next day, I drove to the warehouse for the first time in weeks. I walked among the cars, touching their hoods like old friends. The Mustang I had saved from the salvage yard, the Corvette that had been forgotten behind a farmhouse, the Porsche that nobody wanted, the Shelby that came from a storage auction. Each one represented years of work, patience, and love. I realized that I could not give up, not on the collection and not on Harper. Even if she hated me now, even if she never spoke to me again, I would keep the door open. I would be here if she ever needed me. I went home that night and slept better than I had in months. The rain started falling around 9 in the evening, just as Derek had predicted. Heavy sheets of water drummed against rooftops and turned dirt roads into rivers of mud. It was the perfect night for what he had planned. Derek and Victor parked their truck behind a cluster of trees about half a mile from my property. They wore dark clothes and carried backpacks filled with tools, bolt cutters for the fence, a signal jammer for any basic alarm systems, flashlights, gloves, and a portable winch in case they needed to move something heavy. They approached through the fields, avoiding the main road. The rain soaked them to the bone, but Derek did not care. He was thinking about the payday that awaited him inside that warehouse. He had spent his entire life taking from people who had more than they deserved. In his mind, this was no different. Victor cut the chain-link fence while Derek worked on disabling the exterior alarm system. It was easier than he expected. A basic setup probably installed years ago. Within minutes, they had access to the main door. Derek picked the lock with practiced hands. When the door swung open and he stepped inside, his flashlight beam swept across the interior of the warehouse. And then he stopped breathing. 12 classic automobiles gleamed under the beam of his flashlight. The 1967 Mustang, the 1963 Corvette, the 1973 Porsche, the 1968 Shelby, a 1969 Dodge Charger, a 1955 Mercedes-Benz Gullwing, a 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle, a 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, a 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda, a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, a 1969 Camaro Z28, and a 1964 Aston Martin DB5. Victor let out a low whistle. He said he had never seen anything like it. Derek's hands were shaking, but not from the cold. This was more than he had ever dreamed. Not just a car or two, but a full collection worth millions. He pulled out his phone to call another associate who could arrange transport for vehicles of this value. What Derek did not know was that his signal jammer had only affected the exterior system. Inside the warehouse, a secondary security network remained active. Motion sensors had detected movement the moment they entered. Cameras had captured their faces, and an automatic alert had already been sent to my phone. I was sitting in my living room when my phone buzzed. The app showed a live feed from inside the warehouse. 2 figures moved among my cars, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I recognized Derek immediately. His face was clear in the camera's infrared view. For a moment, I could not move. Then a cold calm settled over me. I called Lou first. Then I called the police. Then I got in my truck and drove toward the warehouse through the pounding rain. On the way, a single thought consumed me. Was Harper involved in this? Did she know what her husband was doing? Had she betrayed me that completely? I pushed the thought away. I would find out soon enough. I arrived at the warehouse before anyone else. The rain had lightened to a steady drizzle, and I could see the glow of flashlights through the windows. I sat in my truck for a moment, gathering myself. Then I walked to the main entrance and pushed the door open. Every light in the warehouse blazed to life. I had wired them to a single switch by the door designed for exactly this kind of moment. The sudden brightness blinded Derek and Victor, who threw up their hands to shield their eyes. When Derek's vision cleared, he saw me standing in the doorway. His expression cycled through surprise, anger, and then something like amusement. He lowered his hands and smiled that too wide smile. "Matt," he said. What a coincidence. I stepped further into the warehouse. My boots echoed against the concrete floor. I said, "There is no coincidence here, Derek. Or should I call you Daniel?" The smile faltered for just a second. Then Derek recovered. He spread his hands and said, "Look, I can explain. I was just checking on the security. Harper mentioned you had some property out here, and with all the break-ins lately, I thought I would make sure everything was locked up." I looked at Victor, who was standing near the Corvette with a crowbar in his hand. I said, "And your friend there, is he a security consultant too?" Derek's mask slipped further. His voice hardened. He said, "Okay, Matt, let us cut the act. You have been hiding this from everyone, including your own daughter. You let Harper grow up thinking you were poor while you were sitting on a fortune. What kind of father does that?" I felt anger rise in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. I said, "The kind of father who wanted his daughter to know the value of hard work. The kind who did not want her to become a target for men like you." Derek laughed. He said, "Well, guess what, old man? She is already mine. We are married. Community property laws mean half of this belongs to her, which means half of it belongs to me. So why do we not talk about how we can make this work for everyone?" I heard tires on gravel outside. Headlights swept across the windows. Lou's voice called my name from the parking area. I said, "I do not think so. I spent 30 years building this with my own hands. You think you can just take it in one night?" Derek's expression darkened. He took a step toward me. He said, "You are too old to stop us. Too slow. By the time the cops get here, we will be gone, and your precious cars will be halfway to Mexico." More headlights appeared. The distant wail of sirens cut through the rain. Derek heard them too. His confidence cracked. He turned to Victor and hissed something I could not hear. Victor grabbed the crowbar tighter and started moving toward the back exit. Then the main door flew open again, and Harper burst inside. She was soaked from the rain, her hair plastered to her face, her chest heaving from running. Her eyes swept across the warehouse, taking in the cars, taking in her husband, taking in me. For a long moment, no one moved. Derek's face transformed. Concern, tenderness, the mask of the loving husband snapping back into place. He said, "Baby, what are you doing here? This is not what it looks like." Harper did not respond to him. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a phone. She held it up so we could all see the screen. "I found these," she said. Her voice was shaking, but her words were clear. "Text messages. Between you and someone named Victor. About breaking into my father's property. About taking everything he has. And about dumping me once you got the money." Derek's mask shattered completely. His face twisted with fury. He said, "You went through my phone. You stupid, ungrateful woman. I gave you everything. I made you somebody. And this is how you repay me." Harper flinched but held her ground. She said, "You lied to me. You made me think my father was the enemy. You isolated me from everyone who cared about me." Derek took a step toward her, his hand raised. I moved before I knew what I was doing, putting myself between them. I said, "That is enough." For a moment, Derek and I stood face to face. His eyes were wild now, all pretense gone. Behind us, the sirens grew louder. Victor had already fled through the back exit. Derek was alone, trapped between his victims and the approaching law. 2 police cars pulled up outside. Officers emerged with weapons drawn. Lou appeared beside them, pointing toward the warehouse. Derek made one last desperate move, lunging toward the side door. But he slipped on the wet concrete and fell hard. By the time he got to his feet, 2 officers had him surrounded. As they put handcuffs on his wrists, Derek screamed at us. He screamed about lawyers and lawsuits and revenge, but his voice grew fainter as they led him away, until finally it disappeared into the rain. Detective Marlene arrived within the hour. She was a calm woman with gray-streaked hair and 20 years of experience. She listened to my story, reviewed the security footage, and took statements from Lou Harper and me. Within days, the full scope of Derek's crimes became clear. In addition to the attempted burglary, he faced charges of fraud, identity theft, and forgery. The fake documents he had used to trick Harper into signing away power of attorney were traced back to a counterfeiter in Miami. Most damaging of all, the 2 women Derek had previously married came forward once they heard about his arrest. Their testimonies added years to his potential sentence. The district attorney estimated 15 to 20 years in prison. Derek's scheme, the one he had spent months planning, the one he thought would set him up for life, had collapsed in a single night. After the police left, after the statements were given, and the evidence was collected, Harper and I stood alone in the warehouse. The rain had stopped. The first gray light of dawn was creeping through the windows. Around us, the cars sat silent and gleaming witnesses to everything that had happened. Harper had not spoken since Derek's arrest. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the 1967 Mustang like she was seeing it for the first time. "I'm sorry," she finally said. Her voice was barely a whisper. I did not respond right away. I walked over to the Mustang and ran my hand along its hood, feeling the smooth metal beneath my fingers. I said, "This was the first one. I found it in a salvage yard when you were 4 years old. It took me 2 years to restore it. I worked on it after you went to sleep in that little garage behind our house." "Do you remember that garage?" Harper nodded slowly. She said, "I remember hearing sounds at night. I thought you were fixing other people's cars for extra money. I was sometimes. But mostly I was building this." I looked around at the collection. 12 cars, 30 years of work. I built all of this for you. Harper's face crumpled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She said, "I treated you so badly. I believed everything he told me. I chose him over you." I walked to her and took her hands in mine. I said, "You were manipulated by a professional. He knew exactly what to say, how to isolate you, how to make you doubt the people who loved you. That is not your fault." "But I should have seen it," she said. "I should have trusted you." I pulled her into an embrace. She felt so small in my arms, just like when she was a child, waking from a nightmare. I held her and let her cry. When the tears subsided, I stepped back and looked at her. I said I would trade all of this to have my daughter back. Every car, every dollar they are worth. None of it matters if I do not have you. Harper wiped her eyes. She looked around the warehouse with new understanding. She said, "How did you do it? How did you build all of this without anyone knowing?" I smiled for the first time in months. I said, "That is a long story, but I would love to tell it to you if you want to hear it." She nodded. We sat on a workbench near the Corvette as the sun rose higher. I told her everything. The car show with my father when I was 8. The Mustang in the salvage yard. The decision to keep it all secret. The years of restoration, of patience, of building something beautiful out of things the world had forgotten. By the time I finished, the warehouse was filled with golden morning light. Harper sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, "I want to learn. Can you teach me?" I looked at my daughter, at the woman she had become through all her struggles and mistakes. I saw Sandra's determination in her jaw and my father's curiosity in her eyes. I saw everything I had hoped for and everything I had feared losing. I said I would like that very much. 3 months later, Harper had moved back to Ohio. She rented a small apartment near my house and started a new job at a local marketing firm. The divorce from Derek was finalized without complications. As a convicted felon, he had no standing to claim any marital assets, and Harper wanted nothing from him anyway. We started slowly, Harper and I. Dinners twice a week at my kitchen table. Walks through the neighborhood on Sunday mornings. Gradually, the conversations deepened. She told me about the years with Derek, how he had systematically undermined her confidence and isolated her from everyone who cared about her. I told her about the loneliness I felt after she left the birthday I spent alone, the Thanksgivings without her laughter. Jimmy Tran became Harper's unlikely mentor. He taught her the basics of automotive restoration, starting with simple tasks like cleaning parts and organizing tools. She proved to be a quick learner, and by the end of the first month, she was helping with actual repairs. Watching them work together, I saw a future I had never dared to imagine. Grandma Ruth came up from Texas for a week in the spring. The 4 of us had dinner together in my small house, crowded around a table meant for 2. Ruth looked at Harper and me at the easy way we spoke to each other now, and she smiled. She said, "This is what family is supposed to feel like." On the anniversary of Derek's arrest, Harper and I went to the warehouse together. She walked among the cars with new eyes, touching each one, asking about its history. When we reached the Dodge Charger, still unrestored, she asked if we could work on it together. We started that very day. Harper sanded rust while I inspected the engine. Jimmy came by with parts he had sourced from a dealer in Michigan. Lou stopped in with sandwiches from the deli downtown. As the sun set through the warehouse windows, I looked at the people gathered around me and felt something I had not felt in years. Peace. I do not think about Derek anymore. He sits in a federal prison serving the first years of what will be a very long sentence. The women he deceived before Harper have found some measure of closure. The lawyers say he will not be eligible for parole until he is an old man. But that is his story, not mine. My story is about what I built and who I built it for. It is about the secrets we keep and the ones we should let go. It is about fathers and daughters and the long road back to each other. The warehouse is no longer a secret. Harper knows everything now, and someday when she is ready, she will inherit all of it. But the most valuable thing I will leave her is not the cars. It is the knowledge that she was always worth more than any collection, any fortune, any secret I ever kept. I spent 30 years building something in silence. I thought I was protecting my daughter by hiding it from her. But the truth is, the best thing I ever built was not in that warehouse at all. It was the bond between us, tested by betrayal and strengthened by forgiveness. And that is something nobody can ever steal. If you have stayed with me until the end, I want to ask you something. Have you ever kept a secret from someone you love thinking you were protecting them? Or have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was not who they seemed? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched you in some way, please take a moment to hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already, and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Every share, every comment helps these stories reach more people who are going through their own struggles. Thank you for listening to an old man talk about cars and family and the things that really matter. I hope wherever you are tonight, you have people who love you and the wisdom to hold them close. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Until next time.